pink.
Until we're all combined. Okay. Hi everyone, this is Emily on duty today, and I am making pumpkin bread. And this recipe comes from Once Upon a Chef with Jen Segal. She has a fabulous recipe for pumpkin bread, for your basic pumpkin bread. However, since my boyfriend is diabetic, we are cutting out the sugar in this and replacing it with Truvia sweetener, which is basically stevia. And we are also replacing the regular white flour, which is all-purpose flour, for almond flour. So that's what we are substituting with today. We'll see how this comes out. I have the oven preheated to 325 degrees. So right now what I am doing is I have combined cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, baking powder, some baking soda, 2 cups of white flour, but I replaced it with 2 cups of almond flour, which is basically a keto-friendly flour and low carb for the recipe. And I think it called for cloves as well, but since cloves to me is a little bit on the strong side, it called for 1 teaspoon, but instead I'm doing half a teaspoon, so it won't be as strong, because you already have other pumpkin spices in the recipe. And it calls for 1.5 sticks of butter, unsalted butter, it's kind of on the softened side. Again, 2 cups of sugar, but I replaced it with 2 cups of Truvia sweetener. I'm sure everyone has heard of that brand. And calls for 2 large eggs, as well as 1 15-ounce can of pumpkin. However, I have 30 ounces of pumpkin here, so I only have to use half of it, because just taking 1 15-ounce can with this recipe, it actually doubles into 2 loaves of pumpkin bread. So that's what I'm going to do. And with this recipe, I tend to add extra cinnamon, because for me personally, a little extra cinnamon is actually great in a pumpkin bread recipe. That's actually one of the secrets. The only thing that wasn't called for in this recipe for pumpkin bread was vanilla. Vanilla makes any baking recipe taste better, whether you're baking or not. Actually, if you're making pancakes in the morning and you're just following a basic recipe for pumpkin pancakes, add extra vanilla to it, because that always makes the batter taste better. Whether you're doing any basic recipe for baking, in the world of baking, it's always good to have your basic vanilla on hand. So I have mixed up all my dry ingredients. I need to still mix up my dry ingredients, so I'm about to whisk that, because it's calling for me to whisk it. So here I go now, trying to mix it and incorporate the dry ingredients. Try to get this all mixed in, incorporated very well. You don't want too many lumps or extra pieces floating around. And as you can tell, I'm whisking this in a medium-sized bowl. Try to get all the extra lumps out as much as I can. See, we still have a little bit of cinnamon lingering, so I'm trying to mix this into the almond flour very well. All right, that looks pretty good. So the next thing we're going to get ready for is doing a separate bowl for this recipe. We're going to actually start mixing the wet ingredients, getting them ready. So I'm going to get a separate large bowl for this. And I'm looking at the recipe here that she has here. So at this point, what you want to bring out is your beater for the mixing the wet ingredients. So I am grabbing our handheld mixer, which is a basic mixer in any standard kitchen, and grabbing the 2 beaters to attach to the hand mixer. Now, important thing too, before you even do any of this too, is also take your bread loaf pan, and it calls for buttering your pan so that way the pumpkin bread doesn't stick. And you can take any kind of flour. So in this case, I still use almond flour to help spread around this on top of the butter just to dust it, and that's what it calls for. That way, I think the reason why they do that is because they don't want the pumpkin bread sticking inside the pan. And it's always good for me to invest in a good bread loaf pan when you do any kind of bread recipe, whether it's regular bread or whether it's a dessert kind of bread like your pumpkin bread or your basic banana bread. So we're going to do this right here and set up the hand mixer. And make sure I have this turned off for safety reasons. And make sure nothing's splattering. You do not want stuff to splatter. That would not be a good thing. So the next thing that we have, the first thing you always add in all of your wet ingredients is your standard butter. I have unsalted butter here. Well, in this case, I have it kind of salted, but you can use salted or unsalted. It doesn't really exactly matter. I mean, although I don't bake very much, so I'm not sure what the recipe would still be like, whether it's unsalted, because that's what it called for, but I have salted butter, so we'll see what happens with the salted butter. I don't know if it makes any kind of difference or not. If anybody knows of that answer, whether the salted or unsalted butter makes a difference in baking or not, you can always message me down in the comments below. So we're going to add the butter now. Now we're adding our 2 cups of pre-measured Truvia sweetener. So we're going to add that right now. So it's the basic 2 things we got to do. First, we're going to start beating the butter and sugar. It's not like your normal sugar, so it takes time to beat it a little bit. So right now I'm just beating butter and sugar. It'll take a little bit here to get it mixed up and beaten into. Make sure you don't want to have too many clumps of butter. When it comes to Truvia sweetener, when you mix it with butter, the consistency might be somewhat different. It might take a little bit longer to weld it together. So I'm not used to baking a whole lot of healthy recipes at home. This is like the second time I made pumpkin bread on my own. Except this time it's a healthier replacement for the sugar and the white flour. Sometimes baking can get a little bit messy, but that's normal. I learned to get a little bit messy in the kitchen sometimes. Because life is messy itself. You gotta learn to have fun with it sometimes. Depending on what kind of mess you're talking about. So I was trying to have this incorporated a little bit. I probably didn't have the butter softened enough because that's important. Now this time calls for adding the eggs. You got to add it one at a time. So this is what we're going to do. Gotta beat well after each addition of the eggs, which I did not know. So here's the first egg we're adding. So you're going to add one egg at a time. And mix it very well. Now we're going to add our second egg. There we go. Because this recipe calls for 3 eggs, but they want you to add one in at a time. Mixing after every additional egg. And then here goes the third egg. We'll mix that in thoroughly. So now the mixture is starting to come together, as you can see here. I'm going to mix this in really good. Beat this in very well. Make sure all the ingredients are incorporated. Don't want any loose bits to be anywhere in the mixture. We want this to be light and fluffy. Just beating this for at least a minute or two. Looks good. So now the important part, of the best part of all, is adding in the pumpkin. And again, what we want is just half of the can because it only calls for 15 ounces instead of 29 ounces technically on this can. Because just with 15 ounces, it's going to make 2 loaves again of pumpkin bread. I'm going to take a spoon out here. We're just going to take half of the can because we only need that much. Okay, that looks about right. Now we're going to start beating in the pumpkin. At this point, she said it's going to look a little bit curdled, but that's going to be normal for the mixture. Get this mixed in pretty good. Now we're going to start adding our dry ingredients into the wet mixture. And you want to do it at a low speed, do a little bit at a time. So I'm going to put at least my mixer on level 2 at least to keep it low. And you want to add the mixture in slowly because you don't want the flour getting all over. So I'm going to start adding just a little at a time. See what happens here. this is going to be interesting that I'm replacing it with almond flour instead of your normal white flour or all-purpose flour. See what this tastes like. So now we're going to incorporate the rest of the mixture. Now I can start beating it faster, keeping it incorporated. The one thing I'll add now is the vanilla to this, because that gives, again, any baking recipe makes it taste a little better. So just add just a tiny bit. There we go. We'll add that to it. So I think this is about ready to be turned over into the loaf pan now. I'm going to take these off here for a sec. Put them in the pan so that way they'll get washed. And wrap up the hand mixer. And now we're going to start transferring this. Hopefully, just going to mix it one last bit to make sure we get every piece of the recipe. And now we're going to add this to the loaf. This is not your normal size loaf. It's more of your large size loaf for bread or any kind of pumpkin or banana bread. So hopefully it should take all of this into this loaf. I'm just going to spread everything evenly. So this is going to be interesting since I'm using a different kind of flour this time. The consistency may not come out the same since you're working with a healthier flour versus your white flour. I don't know if it'll rise as much as your regular all-purpose flour. Use up all this as much as possible. I'm getting this spread evenly. Spraying the last touches of the bread. wash my hands here for a bit and get this stuff off. And it's calling us to put this bread in the middle rack, so we're going to end up putting that in the middle rack. And I don't want to burn myself, so I'm going to wear, for safety, wear these gloves. Put this bread in the middle rack. And I think for this recipe, let's see how many minutes it calls out for. It's supposed to bake it really 65 to 75 minutes. Since this is almond flour, we're going to try out for at least 70 minutes. And I'm going to set that timer now. Or maybe we'll try an hour and 15 minutes. Come on back in an hour and 15 minutes and we'll see how it turns out. See you then.